Hi, welcome to Cafe 229. Today we're very happy to have Dr. Jeffrey Rubin. Dr. Jeffrey Rubin is a psychoanalyst, meditation teacher, and author of 6 books. More importantly, he developed his own style, meditative psychotherapy. Hi, Dr. Rubin.
Nice to see you, Peter.
Hey, so happy to have you to be on Cafe 229. So I know you are one of sort of the respected pioneers of someone who integrates Buddhism and psychotherapy. Can you tell us a story about how you kind of get started in this process?
Yeah, when I was a typical male athlete, and I love basketball. Basketball, in a way, was my spiritual practice, although I didn't realize it then. And when I was 18, I had an experience playing basketball, which opened doors to another realm. And then I became curious in college and after, what was that realm? What was that experience that I had? It was a kind of deep meditative experience. And that started a quest. There's more than just winning, and there's more than just traditional male values. It opened up a doorway to a new world. And then I began searching out what is that world and how could one live there more consistently.
So I think I read your essay about that basketball experience. If I remember correctly, it's like you made some really important shot or maybe something like a buzz beater kind of very important shot, and whether the ball went in or not is not the most important point. It's the fact that, can you describe us a little bit of that moment that you had?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. As you were talking, I was thinking, no, it wasn't even making the shot that was very important.
Okay.
So what happened was we were playing a league game that we had to win. And I was, as I said, a typically conditioned, competitive male athlete. And I hit a shot with 10 seconds to go. And we thought our victory was sealed. And then the other team hit a shot with 5 seconds to go, and everybody was crushed.
Man, I hate that.
It's the worst, and especially if you're a competitive male athlete.
I know.
A strange calm descended upon me, and I walked over to the coach. Everybody panicked and was almost giving up, and a strange calm descended. And I walked up to the coach, and I put my arm on his shoulder, which I didn't usually do. He was also my English teacher. And I said, please tell them not to panic and just to get me the ball. So if I remember, we rolled the ball in. And for those of you not familiar with basketball, the clock doesn't start winding down until you touch the ball. So they rolled it the whole half court. And I got the ball, and I turned, and I dribbled up court. And the guy guarding me was much taller. I'm about 5'7", and he was 6'2". And a strange thing happened, which is I lost all sense of the surrounding environment. I didn't hear people yelling. I wasn't hoping to be the star or terrified I'd be we used to call it the GOAT, in a different meaning than now, but the one who blew it. None of that happened. I entered this zone where there was no time, and there was no fear, and there was no hope. It was just powerful presence, really powerful presence. And I sensed that it was time to shoot. And I jumped in the air just when I sensed the 5 seconds was up. And the guy on the other team, as I said, was about 6'2". So he jumped in my face just as I released the ball. And I couldn't see anything, but I just released it. And then I was in this zone of no consciousness. I guess they call it in Japanese mushin, no mindedness, in the martial arts, no mindedness, meaning your mind is not located in any one place. It's just kind of an open presence. And then I look up, my feet hit the ground, and I look up at the scoreboard, and it says Woodmere 51, Fieldston 50. And people start screaming and mobbing me on the court. And I felt good that we had won. My oldest friend said that I punched the air like I had beaten death.
Wow.
But I didn't really feel that much about the victory. And when we went in the locker room, everyone is, jumping around and excited. And I kind of showered and dressed really slowly. Everybody was probably already in the bus. because I think I was trying to make sense of what was this realm that I entered, where I was in the moment, but without a sense of time, open, but without any fear, because it was a new realm that I had entered, Peter. And it became a question: what is this? Is this reproducible? Can I get back here? And then I went to college. I went to Princeton and read all over the place, philosophy, art history, English literature, all sorts of stuff. I read many, many hours a day, and I was trying to answer the question, what happened? And I did not get any answers, no clarity, no answers. And then the year after college, I think I was in Brooklyn at a health food store, picking up one of those magazines they have at health food stores, and they offered something called a Buddhist meditation retreat, which I knew nothing about. And I just went. Joseph Goldstein taught it, and Jack Kornfield, two well-known Vipassana, contemporary Vipassana teachers. It was a Christmas retreat in 1977 and 1978. And I was blown away. It just opened up a whole new world. And I was also studying psychology at the time. And I was in graduate school training to be a therapist. And I was in psychotherapy and exposed to psychoanalysis. And very early on, I got really interested in how do these two disciplines, I call them traditions of wisdom, Peter. How do these two disciplines that are changing me so much, opening up my heart, how do they go together? And at that point, it was like think about a topic that's censored right now. It was sort of like that. And no one was coming out of the closet, so to speak. And there may have been people exploring both. There were one or two analysts in Britain, Nina Coulthard, but she writes years later. She has an essay on Buddhism and psychotherapy in her book, Slouching Towards Bethlehem. But she said, I didn't come out of the closet. I didn't tell anyone because the therapists thought the Eastern contemplative disciplines were psychopathology and acting out. And the therapists thought the Eastern stuff was acting out. It was just never the twain shall meet. I just kept studying both. And I had a wonderful, wonderful, brilliant, wonderful first yoga teacher, but he was really a philosopher named Joel Kramer. Joel's in his 80s, still alive on the West Coast. And Joel said something profound to me. He said, don't force the synthesis before it organically emerges. So that's one of my messages to all you, especially younger people out there who are exploring this kind of stuff, or even exploring your own thing that's new, or it's the cutting edge of what you're doing, whether in graphic arts or coding or whatever. Trust your intuition and don't force the synthesis before it organically emerges. So a lot of other people were beginning in the 80s to write about this stuff a little bit and having very strong points of view. And I just kept studying both without pushing it, waiting till organically. I've been very, Peter, influenced by Taoism. And one of the things Taoism teaches, I think, the Taoist sage, female or male, tries to understand the sort of rhythm of the universe and join that. It's like riding a wave. It's getting in harmony with the nature of the way the universe unfolds. And I just tried to honor that kind of process of unfolding within. And then eventually things started coalescing. And then I wrote a book, Psychotherapy and Buddhism, toward an integration in the 90s. But it all came out of these experiences that I had of practicing. So one of my messages to everyone is, there's a famous old story where someone says to a cab driver in the city, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the cab driver says, practice, practice, practice. So if you have a practice that speaks to you, whatever it is, it could be cooking, sewing, martial arts, qigong, practice, 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 because the insights come out of the immersion in the discipline.
It sounds like that basketball moment opened up a whole new door, because that basketball experience, that the sense of timeless, spaceless, I think you probably unify with the environment in a way that is like you become the ball becomes you. That spiritual experience becomes a sort of, I guess in Japanese Zen they call it a life koan, right? It becomes a riddle for you to search and look for what was that about. It's funny, I read that article and I shared with all my basketball buddies who are also interested in Buddhism. And I mean, it's as a joke. I mean, they really appreciate your writing. They like it. But one guy is trying to be smart about it. He's like, well, I wonder he will write the same article if he did not make that shot.
Well, it's a fair question. I had an older colleague in LA said, I just curious. He liked it a lot and he related to it. I think he played basketball as Lou Brager. He's an analyst in his 80s in LA. Okay. And started an institute out there, co-founded an institute, et cetera, et cetera. And I think as a young man, he played hoops. And he said, my question is, what would have happened if you missed? I don't know the answer, but I think it seems to me it wouldn't have taken away from the experience I touched into, the doorway that opened or the window that I saw through. That was still real because you see the basket was, this stuff had happened before I saw the ball go through the net. What I left out, Peter, which you'll smile at and understand, and so will your basketball buddies, and so will any girls, women, boys, men out there who play hoops. You'll understand. It was a high arching shot, and we used to call it burying the net. So it's the high arching shot led to a velocity as the ball goes down that makes the net go skyward. So that's the actual first thing I saw. I saw the net up in the air and I knew the ball had gone through. And then I looked high on the wall and I saw Woodmere 51, Fieldston 50. But I could tell from the nature of the net. So all that happened before I saw that we won. Winning was great, but winning also sort of deconstructed some of my male values, that was what was important. And something different began to become ushered in, which is it's the playing, it's important. It's the process, it's important. It's the connecting with other people. It's the exploration. It wasn't the winning. Sometimes you win, sometimes you won't, but it's the life lessons that were more important, I think.
I think you speak the importance of really engage in whatever you do, right? You were saying for the young people, no matter what you do, fully engage in it before try to contrive and make something new. When you're fully engaged in the activities that you do, you naturally will flow with it and naturally will take different talents and put it together. I think based on our previous conversation, like it's sort of like martial arts, right? When you learn one martial art and then you learn another martial art, you don't need to purposefully put them together. You naturally sort of just let them flow and mix as if it's as natural as it can be.
Yes, and it's that, and this is the first part of meditative therapy, which has the thing that I created. It has three dimensions, and it came out of years of saying, how do these two disciplines of wisdom that I love, that have changed me so much, how do they go together? Because not everyone, many people I thought were approaching them in the wrong way. They either said they were the same thing. Some people said, and I'm not going to mention names, but some famous integrator or famous person that writes about both says, well, Buddha and Freud are really saying the same thing. And years ago, I looked at this book, Tao of Physics by Fritz Jove Capra, a physicist on the West Coast. And he said, when you push Western science all the way to the edge, people like Einstein, Heisenberg, etc., they're really saying the same thing as Eastern mystics. And I felt there was a fallacy in that it was emotionally very compelling. Because you see, if they're saying the same thing, then you don't really have to know both. You just know, you know what I mean? You know Buddha and you know Einstein. You know Einstein and you know Buddha. But the interesting question, there's a line that I love in King Lear where Kent, one of the only trusted figures, says, I'll teach you differences. So the interesting thing is how things are different also, how they unite and how they're the same. And we need that in the culture. How are we all connected rather than different and polarized? Yes, we need that. We also sometimes need to make distinctions, though, and say, how are we different? Because in there is the uniqueness of each person. And then if we could have a compassion and an empathy that comes out of appreciating people's differences, then we have a completely different sort of world. Sure. And so I saw that Buddha was really not the same as Freud. And the interesting thing is, were they saying something different? So some people were saying they were the same. Then other people were saying it's a shotgun wedding, you can't bring them together.
Right.
And then a third group was saying they really can be brought together. But when I look closely at that group, I'm also not going to mention names, they were what I call pseudo complementarity. they would reduce each discipline to find a way to put them together. And I became interested in what I call the close encounter of a different kind, or a third kind, where we weren't saying they're opposed. We weren't saying they're the same. We weren't saying that they can be brought together in a superficial way. We were really trying to create an intimate relationship where we respected each tradition, the Western traditions of self-reflection and exploration, the Eastern tradition, contemplative traditions of honing consciousness, being in the present, cultivating more compassion and equanimity, being more loving, being less attached, not in the Western sense of attachment, but what therapists talk about a lot, but in the Eastern sense of being cognitively lost in whatever we believe, rather than being open and spacious and flexible, as you were talking about earlier, Peter. So I began to say to myself, there must be another way. And meditative therapy, it's not for me to say if it succeeds or not, but meditative therapy was my attempt to find a different way to bring together the Eastern contemplative mindfulness traditions and somatic disciplines, also the Eastern somatic disciplines, and Western psychotherapy. So the first aspect, it has three aspects. The first is a heightened presence. Heightened presence. You're really there. My Zen teacher often would say to me, no one's really present. And I would go, oh, why does he have to say that? Why is he? And then years later, I said he was right and I couldn't even see it. But you're talking to people and they're checking their phone. You're talking to people and they're getting pinged and they're, looking at the latest notification. I'm not putting it down. I understand, but we're not really present. One of my weird theories about obesity is it isn't just genetics, and it isn't just, in my opinion, it is. And if anything I say doesn't click, please, people out there, please feel free to throw it out the window. It's just these are sort of footprints. What Peter and I are talking about are footprints of my journey, not meant as blueprints for anything you should believe or anything like that. But anyway, in my experience, one of the problems is not that kids are less active. I mean, yes, maybe kids are less active because they're on screens or social media and all that. But another reason is I don't think we're really present when we're eating. And then I think there's very little gratification. So I scoop down the food quickly. My head's somewhere else. I'm thinking about a meeting, or I'm regretting what I said, or I'm nervous about something that's upcoming. And then I want some gratification. So I scoop up the next bit of food and I'm not tasting that because I'm elsewhere. So I think that and I haven't read about this, but I think there are books out there. I've had clients who have talked about this in my therapy practice, mindful eating. As I said, I'm not an expert because I haven't read, but I think most people are not really mindful when they're eating. And if they would slow down and appreciate the process and literally taste the food, I wonder if they'd feel satiated faster. So the first part of meditative therapy is this heightened presence, not just the words, but the actualization of it. Does that make sense so far, what I'm saying, Peter?
Sure, of course. And I love the fact you say that you take the two traditions. They're not the same, they're not different. That's a very non-dualistic approach itself, right? Not one, not two. So your meditative therapy is, and I think doesn't matter from the West or East, the ability to bring the attention to the present is very important. And because just to experience life itself can already teach us so much.
That's right. I got very friendly with the psychoanalyst Karen Horney, not well known now, but was very big figure in the 40s and the 50s in the United States. Very, very important figure. And she wrote in a very intelligent and very accessible style. And she and Eric Fromm, who they were both in New York at the time, Eric Fromm was also, they were the only analysts that ever became sort of public intellectuals. Intelligent general public knew of both of them. And they also were friendly with D.T. Suzuki, one of the famous 20th century popularizers of Zen, who taught at Columbia and at the New School. And I think they did too, Karen Horney and Eric Fromm. And I got very friendly some years ago with Karen Horney's middle daughter, who was in her 90s when I met her, which I didn't realize. She was the discussant of a paper I gave on psychotherapy and creativity some years ago. And I don't like discussants usually because they're often narcissistic and they hijack the paper and they just want to argue with you and you don't learn anything. And it's kind of boring. And she was the discussant of my paper, which I was reluctant to have a discussant, but I had to at this conference.
Okay.
And she was wonderful. So I wrote her an email after thanking her for her wisdom. And I actually learned from her discussion because she wholeheartedly engaged my paper on psychoanalysis and creativity. And that led to a friendship. She was in California. We came into New York every 6 weeks. Marianne, she's now deceased. She died a few years ago at like 104. Marianne Horney Eckhart was her name. And we became good buddies. And every time she came to New York, we would talk for 2 or 3 hours. We'd have these epic discussions. And one time she said, Jeffrey, life changes people, not just therapy or meditation. Life changes people.
Sure.
And that's a useful perspective that if we remain open to life and have this presence that Peter and I are talking about, just that can create an important shift for us.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned Karen Horney. Her clinic is 2 blocks away from our center.
That's right. It's on 60th all the way east. That's right. Yeah.
Very close by. And I know Horney and Fromm both do have interest in the Zen tradition. So it's great that you mentioned them. But they are also the early pioneers.
They're the early pioneers.
Right,
difference between them and my generation, which was the first generation, maybe later, we were practitioners. We can sort of think of us as yogi scientists in a way. Charles Tort used that phrase years ago, I think. In other words, we were doing the discipline as well as trying to reflect on it. And that was different. From what Marianne told me, Fromm did Tai Chi, but I don't know that he meditated.
Wow.
He also interestingly sat, I think he was in Cuernavaca, Mexico, after he left New York. I think Fromm sat in his courtyard an hour a night and did self-analysis, which is also sort of humbling and interesting. In other words, he was doing some sort of work. So we're back again to the value of reading, and all this is deeply important, but also practice. Whatever it is you're doing, practice. Yeah.
Sure. So what is the second aspect of your meditative therapy?
So let me say a little more about the first. So in the heightened presence, what happens is you start to detect things that normally go somewhat undetectable, like self-judgment, like self-recrimination. So you're literally, and this might be more of a Chan perspective, you literally start to feel your mind as more purified. In early Buddhism, they would call it purified of defilements. So there's less self-criticism, there's less self-attack, there's less self-recrimination. There's more concentration, equanimity, and what I call in the Art of Flourishing in the first chapter, expanded inner space. Inner space is not a location, it's a sort of spirit or attitude. You're achieving it. You may be in it right now as you're listening to our dialogue, if you feel centered and spacious. Centered and spacious, really focused, but yet your mind you can feel it, and you can feel, you could be at a meditation retreat or on your cushion and not be centered and spacious, or you could be in jail in a cell and be centered and spacious. So it doesn't have to do with the external location. It has to do with the inner space you're in, the inner attitude that you're in. And meditation cultivates this. So that's the first thing. There's heightened concentration, focus, spaciousness, and centeredness. And that leads to number 2. Now, number 2 is a little controversial. Number 2, when I saw this some years ago, and it was very powerful epiphany for me, I began to see that meditation is not focused on meaning. It's wonderful. I mean, and I love it. It's one of the several greatest disciplines, I think, that have ever been developed in the history of civilization is meditation and cultivating mindfulness. But meditation is not focused on meaning. And it's just not what the discipline is about. So meaning is really important. We know this as therapists. Meaning is really important because you can't, for example, heal trauma if you don't know the story. And you hear contemporary Buddhists, some contemporary Buddhists will say, that's just your story, let go of your story. I want to be really clear on this, which has deep value much of the time. Because much of the time, most of us, I hope out there you're different, but if you're like me and most of us, much of the time, too much of the time, we're replaying old stuff, anticipating what hasn't happened. I call it scripting the future, and scripting the future negativistically.
Yeah.
I know he won't go out with me. I know she will reject me. You know what I mean? I know this and I know that, but it hasn't happened. It's a phantom. It's like the Buddhist painted tiger story where a guy goes into a cave, he paints a tiger, he steps back, he looks at his creation and he runs out screaming, which to me is a parable about don't make your painted tigers into real ones. But that's what we're doing all day long. That's what our mind is often, that's the conditioning in our mind, right? So we have to go to this stage too, where we decode the meaning of what comes up. Otherwise, we can't let go of it. Now, I have to say, I've treated several Buddhist teachers over the years, a Zen master and a Tibetan teacher and others. And to a person, the meditation didn't do it all. Therapy doesn't do it all either. I'll tell you a story about that in a second. But what happened is they were recycling the same stories from decades before. And I don't fault them. The reason is they were trying to prematurely let go of it. But when you try to contemporary Buddhist teachers will say that which you resist persists. And that's exactly right. But what I'm saying, which is a little bit radical, I think, is that many Buddhists can have an attitude that helps them actually, helps them open to their experience and resist it. And the resistance comes from the agenda of getting rid of. Bodhidharma, who we think brought Buddhism from India to China, is called this, you probably know, Peter, the first Zen patriarch. Interestingly, my Zen teacher pointed this out, and then I went about reading about it, but I didn't know about it until my Zen teacher pointed it out. Bodhidharma, when he's talking about the 5 precepts, which overlap with Judeo-Christian, don't kill, don't steal, don't gossip. This one is different. Don't gossip, slander, etc. But the one about don't kill, Bodhidharma translates it as, quote, well, the English translation, I guess, of the Chinese as, quote, don't nurse a view of extinction. In other words, don't try to get rid of. We have to learn to dance with or navigate. Peter sent me an article before today to read, and he was talking about, he wrote it with another person, and he was talking about Zen and therapy and his own philosophy of therapy. And he was saying it's not so much we get rid of our sense of self. When Buddhism talks about no self, Peter was writing correctly. And interestingly, Peter was writing, this is to the audience, it's that you see through prior ways you looked at your sense of self, maybe as separate, maybe as absolute, maybe as not connected to anything. It's seeing through an illusion. It's not extinguishing. You're not going to die from Buddhism or meditation practice. It's hopefully helping you see through certain illusions, and then you'll have a very different quality life. So when we go to stage 2, this stage of meaning, Peter, am I going too quickly?
No, I think you're going the right speed, because I think the stage of meaning is super important. I think what you just say is very correct. A lot of people try to let go prematurely, as I do work with Buddhist clients, and I see that, I think you can truly only let go of something when you really accept something. But to accept something, you need to understand very well the meaning of it, the history of it. Like, without truly understand where your trauma is, it's impossible to let go, almost, because that's just going to be too contrived.
Exactly. Let me give it a sort of, quote, spiritual example. Years ago, I was treating a jazz musician, first session, lovely, lovely, lovely person. And we don't talk about his parents at all. And at the doorway, as he's leaving, he says, I forgive them. I forgive them. I said, well, wait. Well, who do you forgive and what do you forgive? I forgive my parents. And I said, you can't forgive them. We don't even, you haven't even said what it is. So that would be an example. People out there can see this with forgiveness, where you rush to forgive someone has burned you or hurt you or abused you, and you've explored spiritual stuff, or you're a Buddhist, you're a meditator, and you take on this expectation and strategy of forgiving, but it's premature. And without mourning, grieving, you're actually going to set yourself in more knots, tie up more knots within,
Yeah.
because you're forcing yourself to feel something you haven't organically come to. But
Right.
when you organically work it out, then in some cases that can be a genuine letting go and a genuine forgiveness,
Yes.
a genuine heart connection.
Yeah.
And then there's a different ball game, but you can't get to that if you don't know what it is you're forgiving. So that's the second stage, the stage of meaning.
Yeah, I think that forgiveness example is such a great example for our audience, because that's a good example to understand what we're talking about here. You can't just pretend you forgive someone without knowing what to truly experience what happened. Now, I just remember you mentioned another thing, that when you say you work with several Zen teachers and masters who had, I assume even the one I read that you wrote about, Sam, who had like Kensho experience, right? The experience is similar to your basketball experience, right? But that did not do a thing. Can you elaborate more about that?
Yeah, that's a great. Let me, just for the audience who doesn't know our language here. So let's just call Kensho for a minute a moment of profound opening that anyone out there may have had. You know, and one of the early Zen patriarchs was supposedly an illiterate man, and he was sweeping a pathway, and I think he heard a pebble. He heard the sound of a pebble, and there was a great opening. So great openings can come from anything, but some of the qualities are you let go of a lot of what was burdening you. You literally feel lightened up, and there's a profound presence, and there's deep peacefulness. And there's a sense of self-purification. I don't want to get lost into, because enlightenment is defined differently in different Buddhist traditions.
Sure.
I write about this in a chapter on enlightenment in Psychotherapy and Buddhism, if you want to read about it. One Tibetan teacher was very close to the Dalai Lama, who I got close to, not the Dalai Lama, but the man, Lobsang Rapge. He said it's no more unconsciousness. And Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, called it intimacy with all things. So it's defined differently in classical Buddhism. Defines it as a profound transformation and self-purification, where there's no more anger, greed, et cetera, et cetera. So let's not get lost in that for a second. Let's just say it's a profound experience of personal liberation, in which one feels much more present, much more at peace, and much more loving and interconnected with everything. Let's just, for argument's sake, define it in that way. Profound. Not get lost in academics with this. Okay. So, yes, what I found was that kind of experience did not work out everything. Jack Engler co-edited a book. He's one of the people that writes about psychotherapy and Buddhism. He's probably a generation older than me. I like his work a lot. I think it's really good. And he's written very little. But he edited a book with Ken Wilber and Dan Brown in 1986, I think, called Transformations of Consciousness. And in there, he has 2 chapters. And one of them he's a psychologist also, as well as a Dharma teacher, Jack Engler. He did Rorschach studies of enlightened teachers in India. And they all had conflict. None of them matched the writings, the ideal writings about enlightenment. In other words, enlightenment as total purification, they all were all too human in Nietzsche's title, all human, all too human. They were also wonderful beings with deep transformation, with deep love, all of that. I'm not trying to say either or here. It's not black or white. I'm just saying it was more complicated than the ideal images in writings about this. They still had residues of fear, conflict, interpersonal issues. And so Joseph Goldstein once said to me, he's my first teacher, and I followed him to Naropa the summer of 77 or 78, because I was so taken with his teachings in Massachusetts. And I did an 8-week course. I also studied with Trungpa Rinpoche, the famous Tibetan teacher. And Joseph taught a course, Essential Buddhism. So I ran into him early one Saturday morning at the post office, and we were both mailing letters. And I said, Joseph, so how do you put these 2 things together? I think it's the first time maybe I had asked anyone other than Joel Kramer, my yoga teacher. And Joseph said a really typically Joseph interesting thing. He said, well, it seems to me that therapy unties knots. And when you untie knots, you can meditate better. And when you meditate deeper, you can untie knots. And then you can And it was just sort of a constant, I'll call it a dialogical process where you go back and forth. He also once told me that every major Western teacher was in psychotherapy or had been. And that told me something very, very deep. It was really great to hear that. That told me Buddhism by itself didn't do it all. Now, the opposite is also true. I and many, many others, burgeoning groups of people, wouldn't do yoga, qigong, tai chi, martial arts, meditation, if psychotherapy or Western science or anything or schooling did it all, quote, did it all.
Right,
so I think we need to have a kind of culturally panoramic perspective where we're truly interested in what each culture can teach us.
Right. Makes sense. So meaning to be in presence. How about the third aspect of your meditation?
Well, let me say a little bit more about meaning, and then I'll get to present. I'll get to intimacy quicker. I won't digress. So the thing about meaning is it's essential, and it's often disguised, and it needs to be decoded or translated.
Good.
In other words, let's get down and dirty. So a client in therapy, let's say, quickly hands me a check before the session starts. Now, if I was a Buddhist teacher, I would just, I'm often Buddhist teachers won't, accept money for teaching, but let's say they were in an administrative position at the institution also, and they receive the check as the payment for the person signing up for the retreat, let's say. That's separate from dana, from, freely giving to them. They might not ask, what does that mean? They would just say, thank you. They might note that the person seemed rushed and seemed nervous, but they wouldn't make anything of it.
Right.
So a therapist might.
Right.
Not because they're better, but because it's a different discipline interested in meaning. So I might ask, why the check now? And so then I might even explore, might there be anything to know about that you quickly, and it seemed kind of rushed, threw the check at me before the session.
Right.
And so the person might say one of the following. I was nervous, I would forget. Okay. So that might tell you something about that they carry around a kind of nervousness, or they're often prone to guilt. Or they might be hyper responsible. Or they might be incredibly grateful that you haven't humiliated them or mocked them because they've been in a world where they've been beaten down so much that that if I knew them well, I might jokingly say, if I knew them well, you're pathetically grateful that I'm simply human to you. But you deserve more. You deserve the humanness, and I would have no right to ever make you feel scared or nervous or anything. So you don't have to buy me off.
Right.
Do you see? In other words, and all these could be wrong. That isn't the point. The point is our actions often have a multitude of hidden meanings.
Sure.
The person that comes to the session precisely on time. They walk in the waiting room at precisely 12 o'clock noon. Now, why? Well, maybe they've been kept waiting by their folks, and it's humiliating to be kept waiting. So if they come 10 minutes before, then they don't know if I'll show up, or they're already feeling humiliated. In other words, sometimes there's an iceberg and all we see is the top.
Sure.
And there's a world underneath the water that people swim around in. And that's what I'm calling meaning. So it's often disguised and needs to be decoded. I just wanted to paint a picture for the audience of why this is so important.
No, that's a great.
I'll give actually one more example. This is in one of my writings, where there's a woman who says to her Tibetan teacher, I want to go to Tibet and study Tibetan Buddhism. So the teacher just assumed she wanted to. When I heard this in session, I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, and she looked at me and she said, oh, Freudian slip. And I said, I don't know. Let's just see what comes to mind. And she said, well, I want to go, but I also don't want to go because my boyfriend is into this. And I don't know if this is his thing or my thing. I couldn't have gotten to that if I was a Dharma teacher, a Buddhist teacher, because I would have just accepted the surface of it. So that's why meaning is important. So once we decode meaning, the next and last key part of meditative therapy is what I call intimacy, or sort of enlightened, liberated intimacy. You could think of it. There's a Zen book, actually. that's called liberated intimacy. And what it is a particular kind of self-reflective relationship that's empathic, present, self-reflective, and then creative and playful. And the creativity and the playfulness spring out of not being attached in the Buddhist sense to your own theories. Bruce Lee and his dear friend and training partner, Dan Inosanto, came up with this philosophy that was above the yin-yang symbol in their dojo in California. And it was absorb what's useful, reject what's useless, and add what is specifically your own. So they had a philosophy of being open to all ways, but being bound by none. That was pretty much a quote of Bruce Lee. And he said in a famous radio interview in Canada, be water, my friend, be like water. Sure. And so water, he said, is the strongest force in the universe. It can go around anything. It flows. If you put it in a container, it takes on that shape. So there's a way of practicing therapy and also teaching Dharma where one is really open to what one's encountering, and that dictates how one moves with it.
Right. Which really talking about, in order for us to flow, we need to realize the relationship that all things and phenomena are interrelated in some way. So that's why things flow. Just like yin and yang, the reason why they can flow together is because they are, in a way, yin generate yang, yang also generate yin. Yin is part of yang, yang is part of yin. Everything's in relationship. That's why they can flow perfectly.
That's right. And the relationship becomes the stage on which old ways of being can be revealed and new ways can be cultivated. Often we can't just do it alone. We need the support of the other. I sometimes say to people that I treat with trauma was created by more than one, and it can't be healed by one alone. In other words, the person in some solitary self-reflection, I mean, maybe they can, but it's really hard. We often need another to meet our experience, to witness what we've gone through, to validate what we've experienced. And this is why I don't resonate with this idea that floats around now. Just let go of your story. What happened to someone in the story needs to be witnessed by someone else. This is the relational aspect of meditative therapy. And in that, some kind of profound healing and transformation can happen.
Yeah, witnessing is such an important aspect. I think one of the most important things sometimes for us to understand something or to understand our own story is to feel understood. Like that's like part of the ingredient. If someone witness our pain, that help us to sort of have a better acceptance and understanding of our own pain.
Exactly. Yeah, it really solidifies. And often what happens to many of us, there's a triple trauma. There's the original thing that happened, whether being tortured in war or sexual abuse or trauma. And then there's often going to an authority, the other parent, who does not validate our perspective. Daddy wouldn't do that, or you must be imagining it. So there's a second profound wounding. And then there's often our attempts to heal it go in the wrong direction, and we end up recreating the whole thing, and then it gets solidified, and then we meet a partner who reproduces it because we're only used to being treated badly, and then it gets really solidified and sort of concretely embedded. And this process Peter and I are talking about is the opposite, where we train ourselves to be present through some kind of meditative-ish discipline. And then we try to figure out where appropriate the meaning of what's arising. Sure. And then the third thing, we're connected with people that support and validate us rather than reproduce the trauma.
That's excellent. Sounds like you have developed your own excellent approach. And right now, we have a few more minutes left. Do you have any sort of final words for our audience? I think you share so many great wisdom with us.
I have a few thoughts. I wrote a book, The Art of Flourishing. It has two different titles because it came out in paperback. The original hardback was A New East-West Approach to Staying Sane and Finding Love in an Insane World. So the essence of flourishing is figure out what it is that helps you thrive. And one way to do it is make a line down the middle of a page. And on the left write what's working in your life. And on the right-hand side, write what's not working. Dollars to donuts, what's not working on the right-hand side is something you'd like to do, but it's not built into your life. On the left-hand side, what's working, whether it's connecting with friends, decluttering, an exercise regime, doing Tai Chi regularly, whatever it is, dollars to donuts, it's built in. You don't question it. You just you do it. So figure out what helps you thrive, friendship, spirituality, working with your emotions, whatever it is, nature, exercise, and build it into your life rather than fit it into your life. That which is fitted in gets done some of the time, but not all the time. One difference between us and like a Simone Biles, an Olympic great, one difference is genetics. Another difference is I don't think they're as focused on feelings as we do. We are. When they wake up at 4:30 or 5:30 and it's cold and wet, I don't think they say, I don't feel like, they may say, I don't feel like practicing, but they do it because they've said they're going to practice. So build into your life what helps you flourish. And the other thing is, let's all strive to bring, Charles Dickens writes about this in Great Expectations, hard-heartedness. He doesn't say that word, but he's always depicting a universe. It's such a hard-hearted world right now. Let's all see if we can bring more patience and compassion to ourselves and towards people we're greeting, even people, especially people that have different points of view, which I run into every day with clients who are on the opposite side of the political spectrum as me. And what I'm trying to learn to do is just open to how they look at things, appreciate the emotional logic and what they're saying, even if we see it as misguided, and not debate them, but try to find a way. We need to find a way, all of us, to coexist more humanly, or we're not going to make it as a civilization. So muster as much patience and compassion towards yourself and towards those, because other people that are very adamant are often wounded underneath that. We can't see it. But if you're not hurting, you don't have to present something in that kind of dogmatic way. Either side. I could show you, when you can too, there's, I have a lot of people will say, well, they, meaning the left or the right, they're censoring and they're, but I could find I do find examples on both of cancel culture and censorship. I really see it everywhere. And I'm not trying to do a false equivocalizing. Everyone's really equal. Everyone's not equal. Certain people are doing things that are more harmful than other people who you just might disagree. But try to bring as much patience and compassion towards yourself and other people. Our civilization is crying. Outside there's a Buddha, a statue of a Buddha, and there's like a chip part of the statue. And I jokingly think of it as the tears of the Buddha, that the world is crying right now. And so the world needs us to try to bring some other force. And it's going to be in us. It's not going to be in the leaders. The leaders are mindless often and not guided by the right values. It's going to be a revolution of all of us that needs to do it. But we need to get along with ourselves and we need to get along with each other to do it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Rubin. You are giving us so many wise ideas and wise words. I hope our audience can all find something that feel they can thrive and self-actualize and be more kind and have more compassion for self and others. Thank you so much again, Dr. Rubin.
Peter, thank you for having me. And people, feel free to reach out. Wherever I am is not for me to say, but it was not by my own efforts. It was standing on the shoulders of kind, selfless, generous teachers. So if I can be of help in any way, feel free to reach out, because it's a way to pass on what's been sort of freely given to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your generosity. So I hope you have learned something from Dr. Rubin regarding of how to make our life more compassionate and flourishing. So every third Friday of the month, 7 p.m., stay tuned.